Welcome to Max Value, the show for business owners and their trusted advisors who are on a mission to maximize their value with business valuation, exit planning, strategy, and maybe even a triumphant return to work. I'm your host, Ben Towne. Today's episode features Jeff Gray, the once and future CEO of SC Labs. We're going to be talking about scaling smart, selling well, and taking back the keys to the kingdom. Jeff, welcome. Normally, I'd just ask you to do a little introduction of yourself and then hit you with questions. But I think really today, just going through the story is the best way to organize ourselves. So just start off a little bit with about yourself and launch into the company, running the company, founding it, the exit, and what's happened since then.
Absolutely. And excited to get into this with you, Ben. So, my history, I've been I grew up in California, grew up in Santa Cruz, California. And, Santa Cruz is a progressive community on the coast of California that's got this great sort of mix of people and cultures and right. And one of the amazing things that I think was a position politically and a support for cannabis in the space. So that was just sort of part of the context of the culture I grew up in. Right? So I've been in cannabis for the last 30 years. I'm 50 years old, so basically my entire professional life. And in that, I've held a number of different positions and been working with the lab for the last 15 years. And so we started SC Laboratories in 2010, and probably like many businesses, right? It just started with a conversation between like-minded people who felt like they saw that they could add something. They thought they could do something of meaning and hopefully something that gave them some joy and they had some passion about, right? And so, we were four of us. We're loosely connected in social circles, and I had been in cannabis by that time for about 15 years, and I sat down with one of my partners who was a chemist at the very first lab of this kind, a cannabis lab that gave data, data about the active constituents, and both from the I want to say on the positive and negative side, right? So you're testing for pesticides, you're looking for consumer safety, and then on the other side, you're looking for the active constituents. Why do I feel the way I do when I engage with my cannabis products, right? And so for the first time, I think after 15 years, he explained what I was doing and the product I was working with in a manner that made sense to me in a way that it never had. It was very interesting. And so I think we all sat down for dinner one night. 45 minutes later, we're toasting over beer, and then we're filing for
Suddenly business partners,
business
right?
paperwork the next day,
Yeah.
right? So you could say that we always do, right? We always knew it was going to work. We always knew it was going to be successful. And so, I think I was brought in really sort of from the business side of it. It's interesting, you sit down with people and we have different perspectives on how we might accomplish something. And I think what it showed us is we had very different skill sets. And so it was actually a great harmony between the four of us, given that the funding that we could pull together, we'd be the first four employees as well, right? And that's probably a common thing as well. So, I think the vision we had was a fairly grand one. We thought that we could participate in the stewardship of cannabis from this illicit drug to something that was more akin to like an herbal medicine or a botanical supplement. And we knew that required addressing, certain elements of concern, consumer safety, consistency in the supply chain, the elements that would help sort of shepherd in the normalization of cannabis, remove its the stigmatization that it had in sort of the grander media or what have you, right? And just acceptance on a wider scale. Specifically, I think what was of most interest of us, like I said, was the idea that we could empower patients to make better choices. And I use the word patients because at the time, I think the most generally accepted space that cannabis people participating in cannabis was in medical systems, and that sort of was the gateway, if you will, into the rec systems that we have today. So that was 2010 in California, right? And since then you've seen a number of states sort of move through the space, and a number of spaces really engage cannabis systems, whether on the medical side or on the rec side. Each time a state pulls in a new set of regulations, generally what they do is they've looked at what's happened before, and they either adopt or at least are informed by kind of what's happened before, and then kind of move forward. And so we've been part of that slow, painstaking process since that time. I think what has really changed for us is when the farm bill came in, and hemp all of a sudden introduce the world to cannabis, right? I mean, when we started,
Certainly, at least the CBD side of it. Yeah, absolutely.
well, I mean, when we were first in the cannabis industry, we actually characterized cannabis in a way. So type one cannabis was what we generally call drug straight. It was a high THC, low other cannabinoid cannabis, right? And then you have a mixed ratio, right, which we call type two cannabis. Maybe it's some kind of a strain that's 10% CBD, 10% THC, and then what you have is called type three cannabis. And basically, it's cannabis where you're looking at either CBD or other minor cannabinoids as the dominant cannabinoid, and you're looking at THC either being there in very small amounts or not at all. So the 2018 Farm Bill comes along, and all of a sudden, the type three cannabis is now the legal definition of hemp. From a scientific perspective, nothing changed, right? It's the same thing that it always was. And so that's a really interesting dynamic for us, because both as people who are enthusiastic about probably the benefits and the rewards of cannabis for the general public, we think that it's an interesting transition, right? The federal government has accidentally legalized cannabis, and it turns out
It's
it's
the
not so
same
bad
plant.
for us.
Yeah.
The same plant, and when you look at what's happening now, it's even the same cannabinoid. Now you're looking at low dose beverages, right?
Hmm.
That's these are THC beverages. You're looking at high THCA flower that's being sold as hemp. That's actually just type one cannabis, right? I mean, cannabis, the cannabinoids in the form that they're in the plant are in their acidic form, THCA versus THC. And so, right, I mean, you put fire to THCA, converts, decarboxylates, it converts that THCA to THC, and all of a sudden, right, we're where we think we are, right? So,
Yeah.
from a business perspective, you can see that we're growing as the industry is growing. We're growing as the footprint of acceptance is growing, and so our business is scaling because we're in the biggest marketplace in the United States, which is California. Sometime around 2018, we also moved into Oregon, right? I think December
Well,
2017 or something like that.
and actually, Jeff, let me stop you, pause you just for a second there, because,
Yeah.
like I said, I know this I could just let you go, and have this, fill up an hour. Uh, for I just wanted to interject and say that the thing that really attracted me to working with you guys back in the day, I don't know, back in 2015, something like that, uh, was the fact that you guys are, yeah, in a cool, exciting industry that had a lot of opportunity, but really it was the four of you partners who were coming uh, at this kind of grade area, that because it was medically legal in California, but still very illegal everywhere else, just about. And you're coming at it from a scientific perspective, and you were coming at it from the perspective of keeping people safe, in a lot of ways, making sure there weren't pesticides, making sure there weren't microbial agents in the products. So that's what really spoke to me, back then, talking to you, and of course, now. Now it's great. Now it's a much bigger thing, and you guys are doing still that same great work, just on a much larger scale. And so, to get back to your narrative, what was it, and at what point did you realize that you had to expand out of California and maybe go national?
Interesting. When we first started looking at expansion, it was really from a perspective of um, a cannabis footprint, meaning that while from a scientific perspective, hemp and cannabis, the same plant, they're very different markets, and politically and from a law enforcement perspective, they're absolutely different things. And so
Hmm.
the cannabis markets basically sit within the confines of the state lines that they're in, the regulatory framework that exists in that state, define completely the cannabis industry for that space, and the walls around that state go up to the go up as far as they go. They never stop, right? And so when we looked at expanding in other states, we're really thinking about it from a state by state perspective. What is like what's attractive about a particular state? I think we're just talking about, you're asking, at what point did we realize like a national footprint would be meaningful? And that would be part of our plan. And, um, I think, we looked at, because uh, the federally, cannabis is illegal, right? It's a Schedule 1 product, and it's actually legal only within the state regulatory framework. We knew that we would grow as big as we would grow within a particular state. We'd try and get market share, but we could never really expand beyond that. That was sort of our limit. So expanding from state to state was really what was going to allow us to, expand our model. Um, you know, I think the, I think the first time that we really considered what would really be a national footprint is with hemp, right? Because hemp
Right.
really look more like alcohol, right? Which is to say, it's federally legal, but the state regulatory framework that would define how alcohol is treated in a particular space. That said, distribution footprints span entire regions or possibly the entire continental United States, right? And so it's at that point that we thought that we could really engage and provide a service to companies who had that sort of a footprint, because it really could only exist within the hemp space, right? And I think that's where we thought, okay, this really makes sense to us. And from a timing perspective, that was really around 2020. I think that was sort of the height of hemp. Hemp really at that point became, when you thought hemp, you would sort of define it as CBD. And now hemp is actually probably defined more by THC than it is by CBD. Hemp is that CBD is either converted into THC, or you're really just extracting it in really low, and in really small amounts, and having some combination of both cannabinoids in it. No,
That's definitely changed. Now, rewinding just a little bit, when you're now 15 years in to SE Labs, but especially at the beginning, did you feel, challenges and feel underestimated being in the industry, etc.?
yeah, probably on many levels. I think you'll find that most people who are the term usually is that we're legacy cannabis people, right? We've been in the industry from well before the time that you saw these sort of investment waves come through, and there've been many in many different forms, right? So, I think very much almost in the same way that cannabis is feel like there's a stigmatization of cannabis, and that even if you look at the taxation frameworks, right? You look at the regulatory frameworks, um, you look at the way in which testing is actually enforced. And this is an interesting thing because it almost sounds counter to like my economic bottom line, but the reality is like, there's it's almost this Faustian deal, is how I've heard it described. And I think it makes a lot of sense. That says the cannabis coming out of the dark and into the light requires a greater amount of rigor in the intensity within which we have transparency, and that we define safety, and that we define these rules. Cannabis is now the cleanest product you're going to put in or on your body. As strange as that seems, right? The
Absolutely.
level to which it's tested I could walk into whatever healthy grocer that you buy your organic produce at and probably fail half of what's on the shelf, right? I mean, it just really is, and I think that's a it's a right. I feel a couple different ways about that, right? There's a real positive thing that says, hey, maybe we should shine more light on what we're actually eating and what is allowed in our food system. We test cannabis that's out of a lot of the places that we grow most of our food. And to be honest with you, most cannabis in some of those places can't pass. Not when it's grown outdoors, not during certain times of the year. That's enlightening, right? On the flip
Because of
side,
pesticides in
because the
particular, right?
pesticides, yeah,
Right.
absolutely. And I think on the flip side, you have to say, well, listen, regulations need to be in line with supporting a healthy industry. Regulations at some point become this insurmountable obstacle within which companies can't really grow and excel, and cannabis is sort of almost stuck in that space, to be honest with you, right? And so um, yeah, I mean that's a significant challenge, right, to the industry. But I think it goes back to your original question, which is it is because it's cannabis, right?
Yeah.
And that's why it has to, right, meet these almost unreachable standards, right? So personally, I think a lot of people in the cannabis industry probably all feel that, right? It says, hey,
Right.
we almost said at the beginning, we're a lab that tests cannabis. We're a cannabis lab because it almost felt like a, almost
Second
like
class
a,
kind of.
in
Yeah.
a way,
Yeah.
I think personally, a lot of my experience as CEO of a company and growing a company is that I didn't have the pedigree of having gone out of school during the summers doing my internships and then moving into a large firm and having that wasn't my business background, that wasn't my business pedigree. But I think the principles in business are very, it's whether or not you can describe gravity. Gravity exists, and you can describe the conditions under which everything is subject to it. It's the same way whether you have the vernacular in order to be able to have the conversation at that level or not. And that's kind of where I was stuck personally, which is I didn't have that pedigree, but I had been in business long enough to understand what a healthy business looks like, how to drive the bottom line, how to scale that business, and how to do so with the structures within the business that were stronger. We ran a business that was significantly better than a lot of our competitors because
Oh
we
God,
saw
yes.
ourselves as this is where we want to be. This is who we have audited financials, 7 years before anybody thought that made sense. We were being ISO accredited, years
Sorry.
before anybody else. you know, I think those were all like we really bought in. We really bought in that those systems, that those efficiencies were going to drive our business forward. And I think it did. Once we finally got into the space to exit, you have to be able to display competencies that you're not just throwing it together, right? And I think that we had that training, we had that background. The other thing, I mean, look, we're all, like getting in front of investors. That wasn't part of my background. And as CEO, that is part of your role. You're raising money, you're putting that together. The other part is, as a CEO of color, I didn't see a lot of people who looked like me. I didn't engage with a lot of people who looked like me at those levels. That wasn't where money was coming from. And then, additionally, we talked about these waves of investment. That was a really interesting phenomenon here. We had the penny stock, reverse mergers, get on the pink sheets, go ahead and, raise whatever money you can and try and make your go at it. I don't know one company who did that successfully, but I do know that most of the investors who tried to spin that up and, put the deal together made some money, right?
Absolutely.
So yeah, I think we were, I think, I understood that. I understood at times that people may have seen me in a particular way. Did I feel like I wasn't equipped to deal or that in some way I was lacking something? No, that part I didn't feel at all. But I did understand that at a certain point you have to engage people and you have to enlighten them as to, I understand the value in what we're bringing, right? And and we're looking for great partners, right? That's all we were very clear in that. And so unfortunately we passed on almost everything, but that's sort of where
Except
we
the
ended
right
up.
one.
Except the
I
right
mean,
one. Exactly.
and I think that's, kind of that's the next stage of the story really is at some point you all kind of realize that even with the excitement in the industry and the growth you were able to accomplish, you wanted to take some of those chips off the table. And at that point, you're pick up from that point, when you want to actually have take some cash out.
Yeah, I mean, look, it wouldn't even be honest for me to say that that wasn't a part of the consideration, but it was, it was definitely more than that. I mean,
Mhm.
we had been by that time we think we had been in the industry for 12 years. It's a difficult space to be successful in because of that one, the regulatory burden, and then what we discussed in terms of like the federal position with cannabis as a Schedule One, even though the states had basically not only set up a regulatory system that approved of cannabis as either medical or recreational, both, and a licensing framework within which you can participate. It didn't change your lack of access to banking. It didn't change your lack of access to capital. It didn't change the require 280E requirements on whether or not you could even claim cost of goods sold. And so, for us, it's a really for anybody who participated in cannabis, really, it's a really difficult space to throw, right? And so I think we did an outstanding job of doing that, but we'd have to piece things together to really make leaps, right? And you're not really going to make that. Um, it's more expensive. It's more time consuming. It's right. That part is a grind to really be able to think that you can position yourself for real growth, right? In terms of engaging with a capital partner, small raises, constantly kind of putting it together. The one thing we did do though is I will say that like, um, we were diligent, and it was very important to me to protect my partners and the investors that we had brought in early. So by the time we actually did get to a deal, we owned almost 90% of the cap table. We had taken very little dilution, and it was twofold. We realized one was value, and the other one was control. We had a vision. We wanted to pursue the things that we were interested in, and that was something that we held dear. And so we didn't even try to marry that to an investment partner. We just said we'll keep that. We'll keep that until we need to get to a certain point. Um, so yeah, I mean you know the business environment, the macro business environment was a portion of it, right? Just the difficulty there. We knew at that point we needed to make a change, and then just my personal life. I mean, I was at the point that I was having kid number 4 and 5. I think that my son, who was born in 2018, my wife had my son on a Thursday. I was back at work on a Monday, right? The business was demanding. I needed support. I needed to build the company that was stronger than just the people at the top of it, but that we could also invest in the systems to support it on a much longer term. So by the time we got to that point, we just sort of also found good partners. We found smart money. We found people who were serious, people who had deep pockets and a vision, and really understood the space. Right? I mean, diligence works both ways. You're trying to
Right.
qualify me as a partner, and I want to know, do I really want to follow your lead? If you're going to become the majority owner of this business, and you want me to participate, then I have to really believe that you have a good understanding of what's here, right? And so we were lucky enough to find that, right? And it was more than just a sales pitch, which is great.
Absolutely. And I mean, some things come to mind about this, in your discussion, in your search for a partner, for a finance partner, and in the discussions with them, you know, first off, you guys were very clear about what you wanted out of a deal. And,
Right.
there are some things to negotiate, and there are some things that are non-negotiable. And you were very clear about what those things were, which is hyper important. And then secondly, even though the partner is the one with the money, the resource, let's say it's not even the money, it's the resource to, change some parts of the business, you you're coming at it as equals, right? Because you've built something great. They want to enhance it, and and go into business with you. So I think that's really interesting, and you kind of brushed up on it a little bit, but right in the I remember right in the middle of the conversations, you had your twins, with
That's right.
and that kind of in one sense put the pause button on, or you maybe derailed a little bit the conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I only only had the experience that I did, right? Given that we had shied away from money for the most part up until that point, I the size of this deal was significantly bigger. But like I said, I'd gone through that with my middle son, and just not really giving that moment in my life that the right. I mean, you have to value your time and the things that are important to you and your family as more important than the business. And honestly, as a business owner, sometimes that gets out of whack, right? And so, in this instance, I was very clear up front, and I said, "Hey, we're due in July. I believe we started talking in April. We had just met in April, just getting into the conversations. I said, hey, we're due in July, and I'm 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 going to focus my energy there. I'm going to take at least 2 months to focus on that radio silence. Like, is this that has to be that's important to me, right? That's a non-negotiable. And not only um, were they amenable to that in the beginning, but I didn't get a single phone call. I didn't get a single, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah,
they
they
really
respected
gave
it.
me that space. They did, and that was important because a deal of that size is significant, right? And so, I appreciated that, and then I felt like I it also kind of gave me what was interesting. It kind of gave me a moment to step back, take a little perspective on the deal, and then to come back to it. You get mired in the deal, and sometimes the back and forth, and the details of that, you push away from the table and just give it some thought. And it also gave me a brief moment to do that. So, yeah, that was is like I said, I don't know if that's par for the course or that's a rare thing, but it was a meaningful thing to me.
Absolutely. And from my experience, no, that's not very common. Uh, but I would say it's a great test. I mean, like any relationship, you bring in a baby or two, and that's the ultimate test of diligence. So I think it's great.
Sure,
So we get
sure. I mean,
to
I had less sleep than them, but yeah, we both participated in that. Yeah.
yeah. Well, by then, hopefully, that means that you were able to trust him, and so that you wouldn't be taken advantage of while you were
Right.
with the sleep hangover.
Well,
Um,
I'll give you some
yeah,
credit on that too, and as being one of many. I think the thing that I haven't talked about in this, and part of what gave me confidence in saying no during the times he said no, and understanding when the deal was right, understanding the real value of the business, building the infrastructure in the business, the components of the business that it's easy to overlook, but you understand really provide sound business practice, transparency for new partners, is having great people around you and your set of advisors. And we've been friends a long time, and you've been an advisor even longer. And having you know having this circle of people around me who had been there for some time. I mean, 10, 12 years, right? Like, that that gives you this sounding board and this resource and this network on which to draw from. So while you get to take credit for the good, right, for the good decisions, it really is it's a community of people who put time, energy, and something into the business and into sort of the just my framing and understanding of it. So, right, I mean, I'll call it out, and I don't, yeah, as a friend and participant in that, I appreciated all those lessons and the small right, those moments over the years, and they all added up into us really making the right decisions for us at the time.
oh, thanks, man. You didn't have to say that, but certainly appreciate that you're expressing that, and from the opposite side of it, you guys were always great clients, and from I learned a ton, with you guys. It was just, I think it was really great, on both sides, and that's why we're still friends. But getting back to the topic, so the deal closes. Uh, what are you really thinking about? Once that deal closes, how do you react professionally? How do you react personally? What was going on with you?
I mean, like, you're in some ways, it's a lot of what it's a lot of what you build business for. I mean, you're trying to be able to create generational wealth opportunities, options for yourselves and your family, right?
Mhm.
And we're significantly closer to being able to really be at that point, and that's exciting, right? So I think if you probably made a deal and you're not excited about the outcome, you probably made a bad deal, right? So there was a great level of excitement there. We were, I come from, man, my dad was a bus driver. My mother was a school teacher her entire career. Like I was from a blue collar family. We didn't, you know what I mean? I didn't even understand like that was possible. Those kind of numbers were possible. And that's right. What a blessing. Right. So that
Yeah.
was all a part of it, you know. But you know, I think entrepreneurs, if you built a real business, if you built a great business, you love that business. You're invested in that business. That's a part of you. You put everything into that. 12 years is a long time to invest in that. And the people that I did that with were, I mean, they were family. We've got, I mean, right? Some of the people that we have,
And not just
had
and not
been
just the
there the
partners.
whole time.
Yeah,
No, not
not
just
just the
partners,
partners either. Yeah.
not just the partners. No, the employees. I mean, we had, like the first employee we ever had is still an employee there. We have a number of people in a business that had only been open for 12 years, who've been there for 8 to 10 years, right? I mean, I was really proud of them and had gotten to be able to call them my friends. And so it was important to me that they, um, yeah, that I, it was a relationship that I wanted to keep. It was a relationship that I wanted to make sure they were going to be okay. I was just trading them off to somebody else, and it was going to go all kinds of ways, or maybe people wouldn't understand their value in the way that I did. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think that was part of my consideration. I had a lot of confidence in I had a lot of confidence in their understanding of cannabis space. For an outsider, I talked to, I even though we didn't take investment from a ton of people, I had a million conversations over the years, right?
Yeah.
And probably the lesson I should have learned earlier is just don't take the phone call. But I took a lot of phone calls, and I learned a lot during that process too. It wasn't just there's the brain rape phone calls, and you have to move on from those right quickly. But there's also you're trying to understand what are you looking for and what do you understand, and it's almost like a dating process. you know so we had um yeah, we had seen a lot, and this was by far the most nuanced understanding of the cannabis space, which is an incredibly nuanced space. So I felt good about that. It gave me a lot of confidence. Our board of directors was really strong when I met them. They were very smart people. It wasn't
Mm.
just they're here on paper. They brought a lot to the table. I thought that was great. And the people that on the other side that I met. So this was, I guess we call it kind of a roll-up play, right? I mean, there were a set of laboratories in Colorado. They were purchased first, then they purchased SC Labs in California and Oregon. Immediately, I think that closed in February of 2022. By June of 2022, there was another lab acquired in Michigan, and then by April of 2023, there's another lab acquired in Arizona. Imagine I had participated in building two labs over 12 years, and working down to the finest grain of sandpaper that I that I could at the time. And the new labs, it's rough when you just put a lot of stuff together. And I think that was as great as I saw the deal at the moment of the deal. I understood the challenge that you can't throw them all together and think that you're providing a consistent product. We're service business. Labs are a service business above everything. Yes, you have a requirement to the accuracy, the consistency of the quality of your science, the integrity of your data. All of that is there. So we do have a North Star around which to rally, but we're not, in cannabis, we're not just the lab. Like when you think of your blood work, you're going to go to the lab. They have a very finite job they're doing for you. It's a piece of
Right.
paper with some numbers on it. The interpretation of those numbers is up to the medical practitioner, the doctor, whoever is you're engaging with. In cannabis, there is no doctor. Right? They come back to the lab and go, "I don't
Right.
understand this. This isn't what I think it would be. This is wrong." And we have to have a certain level of engagement. We had built a business on that.
And
High
education.
touch.
I mean, the engagement is education to a large extent.
Exactly. Some of our clients are very sophisticated. They're their own science and quality teams, and others do not at all. right? They've never seen anything like this. They just expect a number. They don't understand. So, right. I mean, we're educating broadly at a consumer level, but at a brand level and a producer level, we're also educating. We're educating our clients, and we're trying to be as supportive as possible. And then beyond that, what you're trying to do is not just say, "Hey, you have high blood pressure." I'm trying to tell you, and here are the things you can do about it,
Mhm.
right? And so we have that level of integration into their business and their process. And so imagine that we had been very specific about our business model, how we were going to differentiate as a business, as a laboratory, the level of service we were going to provide, the level of education and sort of professional engagement, the support. I'm never just going to put out a fail. I will engage you and try and do root cause analysis with you. The other
Right.
labs had been, the other labs had been,
Transactional, right?
well, some more so, some less so, but definitely imagine that we had all had our own perspective on how to build the best solution to the puzzle, which was regulators have determined that cannabis brands and producers need to meet a specific set of regulations. And as a laboratory, you can either provide them strictly data, you can help try and build a stronger stickiness to clients by getting them past these struggles to a point where, hey, everything's passing. Great, easy client to manage. Everything always looks good, but we helped you get there, right? So I think that was the biggest struggle. And then, of course, different instrument platforms and blah, blah, blah. So that's where I think we moved from like this honeymoon phase of, hey, this deal closed. Personally, my family is in a much better position. I feel like there's even almost this amount of like recognition of the work that we've done for all those years. We're
Absolutely.
still participating. We're still stakeholders. I get to maybe step back a little bit from my CEO position and take a more strategic advisory position. Maybe get some shorter hours. Maybe get some more sleep. You know what I mean? Like all that was where my head was at, and so that's a beautiful scenario. Some of it
Mhm.
real, not all of it, and then we get into this. Okay, back to business. We sort of made this more complicated. Okay, how do we solve that? Right. And then it's sort of back to, solving this at all different levels. I will say, the one thing I probably didn't, I was a little naive about was that, you know, nobody invests this sort of money to just be patient and see what happens. There's an expectation that results come fairly quickly. The word synergy is going to be used a lot. You know what I'm saying? Like, get to how do you get from here to there quickly? And the explanations of why it's complicated are less important than the results of solving for those complications. And so that was a struggle because, again, all the things I said earlier about cannabis being a hard space, it was still a hard space.
Right.
Maybe this is an easier process in businesses where every rising tide, right? But that wasn't what was happening. Certain markets were collapsing. Certain markets are right. Certain markets are growing. A lot of markets are collapsing. Our clients are going bankrupt. Like it was a struggle, and there's no money in the industry because nobody has access to capital. So there's no right, and so it's all that all that change within that challenge, right? And that's probably where. So that was the up and down of welcome to the new business.
On the next episode,
Definitely the fortunes of the industry just could change on a dime. The regulatory environment changed on a dime. You expect a particular set of rules to come out and something kind of different comes out. Those sorts of things, which just make it incredibly difficult. But what are some of the things that you did differently when you had a second shot at it? I mean, you touched on something. The founders were family, and a found family, and they the leadership and control, and it was all of the things, including the composition of the board. I mean, but were all four of you always aligned? So in this adventure, what was a particularly high point and a particularly low point?
Listeners, thank you for tuning in. This has been an episode of Max Value. Find us on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and other streaming services. Please like, subscribe, and follow. And we'll see you for the next